We have been working on a new Garbage album on and off for the last 6 months, and we just finished 2 of the songs for a record store day. And we were lucky to get real ADT right in the process of finishing one of the tracks, Girls Talk. And so Billy called that in the session, and we ended up using it on Shirley's vocals and some guitars and things. And Billy called the session up so we can show you what we've been using on. Girls Talk started with this guitar riff that Steve played. It's sort of a bit of a homage to Paint It Black by the Stones. It's got kind of a modal riff. And it's just a kind of a clean guitar line, tiny bit of fuzz on it. And in my head, when he first played it, I always heard it with having some wow and flutter, like going through an old tape machine. And I tried to get that in the first couple rough mixes we did and didn't really come up with anything that sounded exactly right. And then luckily we got the real ADT right when Billy started mixing it. So that's the first thing that Billy did, is start working on the guitar tone of Steve's original guitar, and we used the real ADT on it.
Without it, it sounds like this, which sounds pretty cool on its own. If real ADT hadn't shown up when I was mixing this, I would have been happy to go with that. But knowing that Butch was really wanting it to be a little more unique sounding, I decided to experiment with this guy a little bit. It makes it sound a lot more sort of interesting and compelling, I think. And just tossing it up there with this about 7 milliseconds of delay and a little bit, like 3 cents of randomization on the LFO. So the pitch is moving 3 cents either way, and in a random way, not in any sort of obvious way, with a little bit of analog drive on both sides. So I'll play it back again, and I'll just bypass real ADT, and you can listen to it and see what it sounds like without it, and then with it and without it again. So I'll start without it, with it turned off. So yeah, to me, it creates an incredible atmosphere to it. It just makes the guitar riff sound, you know, cool and special.
Yeah, it gives it a soundscape. Well, I have been obsessively looking for an authentic sounding ADT for years. Billy will know this. I mean, even going back to early days at Smart, I used to use a Eventide harmonizer and delay it about 20 milliseconds and pitch it up 10 cents or down 10 cents. And I used it on Shirley, Kurt Cobain, Billy Corgan. I mean, I've always tried to find something that could sort of get that analog sound. When I first got the real ADT, I was kind of floored by how analog it sounded, and immediately, to my ears, sounded much like the ADT that the Beatles used.
One of the things that the AbbeyRoad engineers used to do when they were using ADT there was they would change the voltage going to the delay tape machine. So it would speed up and slow down depending on how they turn the knob.
I like that. That's that sort of tape wow and flutter where it sounds off. It gets a little out and detuned, and you kind of get a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction when it starts warbling out like that. But to me, that's exactly what we were looking for when we recorded this original guitar part.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's kind of hard to do in the digital age now, is anything random. You know, everything is sort of like programmed and then quantized, or, you know, pitch shifted perfectly. And even with the digital pitch shifters, it's still like, you know, when you put something up 12 cents, you can add an LFO, but the LFO is going to still be, it's not going to be random, which is the one thing I really like about the real ADT, is that they put in a random shape to it, which to me makes it so it's not predictable. And when it gets predictable, then you kind of notice it as being an effect. But when it's not predictable, it just seems like it's something that's happening in the real world. The thing I found really interesting about the WAVES Real ADT plugin is that for the first time, I really feel like somebody's nailed that sort of AbbeyRoad era, you know, doubled, flanged, or phased sort of sound. The thing that was cool about the way AbbeyRoad did when they invented the automatic double tracking system, like they did it in a way that nobody else really was able to do because they used two different types of tape machines. And one thing that made it kind of interesting was the second tape machine was actually playing back faster than the first tape machine, so they could make the delay happen before the actual recorded signal. You know, one perfect example is, you know, the guitar solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. It's like Clapton's solo on that has got that sort of sound. So when you listen to it, that's the sound of the two tape machines moving sort of out of sync and the delay happening and moving around. And when you hear it, it's like you know that sound because you just, it's like, oh, that's what I've been missing for, you know, all this time. And the only people that were able to do it were them. The next thing I was starting to work on was the vocal. And Shirley's vocal at the beginning of this track is really, really intimate. And trying to come up with something that sounded unique and intimate without sounding, you know, normal or basic was something I was trying to go for. And again, the ADT, I thought, kind of helped add a certain atmosphere that tied it into the guitar part. And that's one of the things I thought was interesting was your ability with Real ADT to put the delay in front of the recorded audio if you want to. So I'll play the vocal back, and then I'll move the delay around, and you'll hear kind of where it's going. On this one, I went with a sine wave, so it would just have a sort of a gentle sort of pitch sweep, because I just wanted to sound, I didn't want the delay, the effect to really draw too much attention to itself. I wanted it to augment the vocal as opposed to being an affected vocal.
Those voices in your head, they do your will.
The first time I put the Real ADT on Shirley's voice, it sounded amazing. It sounded like that John Lennon double track from A Day in the Life.
They bring you to your knees and steal your power away.
So without the ADT on, the vocal sounds like this.
Stop those voices in your head, they do your will. You've everything you need.
Which sounds great. It just sounds, again, was trying to find something that made the vocal sound a little bit more unique, you know? And that's where I think Real ADT kind of came in handy with a little bit of a delay and a little bit of a filter sweep. And I don't have it panned as wide as the guitar because I don't want it to be too sort of unnatural sounding.
Stop those voices in your head, they do your will. You've everything you need. Hate the way they make you weak. They bring you to your knees and steal your power away.
So again, to me, it's just, you know, a great tool to create a unique sort of atmosphere to it. And you have a lot of control over what you want to do with it. It's, you know, I like the fact that you've put the ability to switch the phase on both the source and the ADT. So if you want to get more into, you know, the range of the flanging and phasing that the Beatles did, you can still do that. Because basically, you know, if you flip the phase on the delay side,
Stop those voices in your head,
and then put it
they do your will.
and put the delay so that way the delay is very minimal. Then
Stop those voices in your head, they do your will.
as the pitch moves back and forth around the delay, when it gets right on, it'll kind of cancel. So it creates that sort of like real sort of 60s and 70s sort of flanging, phasing sort of effect. And also, you know, by a combination of the phase buttons, and whether it's in mono or stereo, you can do some really interesting sort of chorusing effects and, you know, other sort of modulation effects, which have been really hard to come by and still sound analog versus sounding digital.
Because of the ability to pan left and right, it's great for headphone mixes. And since 99.9% of people are listening on earbuds out there these days, it's always fun to have a track that's got that kind of crazy stereo effect. You know, it enhances the aural experience. Just for kicks, let's hear it pan wide with a little bit more drive. Like, let's crank the drive up, see what it sounds like with a little bit more harmonic distortion on there.
Those voices in your head, they eat away your will. You've everything you need. Hate the way they make you weak. They bring you to your knees and steal your power away.
I think the drive sounds really good. The drive on both sides on this is very musical sounding, so you use it sometimes. You know, when you start getting into harmonic distortion or overdrives on plugins, they're not very musical, but this is, to me, sounds like it's modeled after an analog circuit, so it's very musical.
I think aside from the obvious, like, it does that sort of retro sound really, really well, I think people will find other uses for it that will be equally interesting. It's just one of those things that you haven't really been able to duplicate to this point very easily, or very, honestly. So for me, it's like the first time where you put something in and you go, oh, okay, that's exactly kind of what, we would come up with these convoluted ways of trying to make it sound like that. And at the end of the day, it's like, it sounded cool, but it didn't have that sort of real analog warmth. And I think that, as people start figuring out some of the interesting little things in there, I think people will start using it in more, unique and more sort of creative ways than just sort of slapping it on and going, wow, it sounds like John Lennon,
I think when people hear the real ADT, they're going to realize that it does have a really engaging, warm character to it, and it sounds very reminiscent of the actual ADT. And you can't really duplicate that with a lot of the electronic doublers. We have a tendency to experiment a lot in garbage, and I then tried putting it on Steve's guitar, and I put it on acoustic guitar. I put it on cymbals on the drum overheads on a drum kit. I ran the bass through it. It's kind of one of those things that if you mess with, sounds good on a lot of instruments, and I don't think should just be looked at to use specifically on vocals, because it sounds pretty amazing on everything. People want an analog sounding tape ADT. The real ADT is going to give them that.